Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of the Geopolitical Pico. My name is Juan Muñoz, and I'm as always joined by my colleague Ronan Wordsworth. How are you, Ronan?
I'm going very well, thank you. We actually might have a third participant at random intervals today. We've got the youngest member of the Geopolitical Pico. Is
the real
3
pickle.
months, 3 months old, so he might give some input as well at various points. But
we'll see. He definitely has better inputs than some of us sometimes. That's for sure.
What about you? How are you doing?
Well, I mean, it's been a busy couple months that we've got. No, this is the first episode that we are recording in the normal setup of the podcast for, I think it's like more than 2 months.
Following Disinformation Project. So if you haven't listened to that, go back and listen to those episodes. But
yeah, you can listen to the 5 episodes that we released on disinformation. There's disinformation, there's Africa, there's Russia, and there's the conference that we participated in on late September, about disinformation in Africa. But we've also been fairly busy with
the startup of the newsletter. So I mean, we know that there's been a few sign-ups so far, but there's a lot of other people that are yet to sign up. So if you haven't, we'll definitely leave a link in the show description down below. So sign up to the newsletter there. We have it every second week, going through some classical geopolitical theories, but then also some of the applicability to the real world experience and what we're seeing in current affairs and contemporary events. So I think it's beneficial as an addition to the podcast, a companion piece.
Yes, and also we are expanding it a little bit with the topics that we're doing today. We're going to be talking actually about the upcoming topic of the newsletter. But I want to make something clear because I've had it told many times. It's for free. The newsletter is free. You can subscribe. There's a subscription plan and so on, but you can get the newsletter for free every feed. There's right now, if you want to support the project, of course, we're more than happy, but it's for free. You can join. You'll receive it in your email box and in your email inbox. And of course, if you have a Substack account, you can also follow us there directly with your Substack account.
Share around with friends, with family, whatever.
Exactly. You know, that uncle now in the Christmas time that he knows much more than you about politics and you want to prove them that he's wrong. So at least you can give him a little bit of basis here.
Exactly.
I mean, okay, so read something that actually happens.
Exactly. So if you haven't, go sign up there. And then on to today. What we're talking about, as you said, is about the same topic as this week's newsletter, which is BRICS. And what BRICS is and what BRICS isn't, because I think there's a lot of, publicity around the group, and we just want to go through some of the background and then what they actually do, what they can do compared to what they claim, and all these different sorts of things. So do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, I think we can start a little bit with the name BRICS. BRICS is BRICS, just for those of you who may have not heard it, although I think after this year and last year, everyone that is a little bit interested in these topics has. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, although it started with Brazil, Russia, India, China. BRIC, you go plural if you want. A little bit of history of this group of countries. In 2001, researchers from Goldman Sachs published a paper detailing how the emerging economies of Russia, China, Brazil, and India were set to reshape the global economy, alluding to the strength of the combined economic potential of those emerging economies. Some years later, in 2006, BRICS was formed, and it was basically a loose coalition of like-minded states aiming to help coordinating their political and economic action in pursuit of shared goals. And in 2009, an inaugural summit of BRICS when members was held in Russia, and a year later, South Africa joined the bloc in 2010. Ever since, the group has been they've held these meetings, but it has not been too active nor too...
If we just go back to the start there and say this group didn't share any ideological similarity or anything, it was literally a grouping made by a Goldman Sachs financial advisor about what the economy is going to look like over the next 50 years and identified these as key markets. So that there wasn't any shared vision behind the BRICS project whatsoever. It was an American financial accountant.
Literally, and when taking into account that in 2001, this is a moment where the Chinese economy is booming. It started its big boom of the first decade of the 2000s. The Russian
India
economy
was obviously all just starting, probably couple of decades behind that acceleration that China had, but also starting the same sort of process of industrialization and development.
And then you have Russia and Brazil, who are obviously, Russia comes from the fall of the Soviet Union, but it's a country which economy is growing in the moment. Is basically fully immersed in the international market at this point.
However, again, I think Russia's is much more commodity focused market than the other two, for instance, as well. Obviously, so much of Russia's exports are traditionally and still to this day the oil and gas, which supports all their industrial base.
Which is something that also shares with Brazil in a way.
Exactly.
A lot of wood, a lot of exports on raw materials that Brazil has, the immense potential of its hinterland, and really Brazil and Russia having pretty similar population, and obviously China and India being the two most populous countries.
South Africa just being added on there. I think part of that was trying to diversify the look at the different market leaders on the continent. Obviously, Brazil, the largest economy in South America, and then South Africa, the largest economy in Africa, but still magnitudes of scale smaller than the other BRICS members, founding members. Like if we look at the size of the South African economy versus the Chinese economy, they're not even in the same playing field, you know. So, I mean, that's another thing. It's basically these emerging markets, however, completely different scales of economy and all sorts of things like that.
Yes, like for example, we can hear BRICS compared a lot to like non-aligned movement, for example, from the war, but it doesn't have much to do with that, because the non-aligned movement was there was
political ideology exactly
than this, and here is more like there's established international financial system and economic system where you have the G8 is G7 now. Quite present, you have the G20 and so on. As we see a little bit, all these countries had their. It was a moment in the end where a lot of bilateral and multilateral meetings were taking place right before the economic crisis, the financial crisis of 2008. Lots of countries that right now don't seem that eye to eye, they were actually communicating at the time much better. It was a different time. We can one day analyze geopolitics somewhere between 2001 and 2011. That can be really interesting. In any case, BRICS has in 2011 they have an official summit, and in this summit leads to the Sanya Declaration, which is basically a series of recommendations and visions for a revised and more representative balance of global power in their view. The scope is really broad. It doesn't come to anything like super specific. It covers long-term objectives such as economic cooperation, financial development, a call for restructuring in the UN, its Security Council, reform and improvement of the international monetary system, support for the development of utilization of renewable energy sources, nuclear power, cooperation for infrastructure development in Africa, in science, technology, innovation. But it's a really broad declaration. It's not something that goes too concise, and it's not something that has really been developed much farther in the following 13 years until today. Although there are a couple of things that did get developed, like the new development bank that focused on funding infrastructure projects within BRIC member states.
It was supposed to be a bit of a counter, I guess, to the IMF, which is obviously American founded organization, which then allows loans to different African countries and other developing countries around the world. And then the BRICS, or that was originally called the BRICS Development Bank, now it's called the New Development Bank. It obviously came in as a counter to that and trying to elevate the financial credibility of these different BRICS countries, I think, on the global stage.
And also it's a way for them to have a soft power influence in countries that are in the developing south, that can access loans that are not attached to the IMF, so they are not attached to the dollar, and sometimes it's
exactly. I mean, of course,
for them. Also, sometimes like the IMF is known for having really tight requests at times. So
yeah, and I think that is something for sure. If we look at the IMF, has definitely been used as a tool of soft power by the US, because to get loans you have to have sort of a strict list of objectives which you're tied to, whether that's levels of democratization or human rights respect for that and things like this. So I think they were trying to offer an alternative path for countries to seek out for development infrastructure financing. And as yet, that has been developed and is operational, nowhere near the scale of IMF or anything like that. But it is a tangible output from the BRICS grouping.
Another thing that they wanted to do was a reduction of the dependency of US dollar in trade and basically de-dollarize their economies, which they've tried under some late... That's why you've probably heard about BRICS, because in the last 2 years, there's been several agreements signed between China and Russia, then between China and Brazil into specific parts of their trade being paid in their local currency, so that they would have stocks of each other's currencies. However,
reserves, but
they will have reserves, but yeah, it hasn't been nowhere near the scale that some people were putting at.
Of course, I think
around 2013, 2014.
For that, I still believe over 90% of all global transactions are done in the US dollar. Additionally, for there to be some sort of alternative to the US dollar, there is the only viable alternative from the BRICS grouping is China, and they will not liberalize their currency market because it gives them a competitive advantage in their industrial and manufacturing sectors, for instance. So they don't have this interest in actually letting a free-flowing currency like the US have done since the end of World War II, basically, and use that as the backing for the US dollar just because of its wide acceptance across the whole world. And China has no interest in doing that. So I think almost that idea, I understand, like you can say, okay, they're trying to de-dollarize into BRICS trade. However, it's still very minor compared to the dominance of the US dollar. And I think that's why a lot of the sound bites, a lot of the analysis, people say, oh, this is going to be the death of the US dollar. And I think that is highly unrealistic. If we look at the market conditions now.
I mean, it can lead to weakening, but I don't see the strength of that weakening. It's I mean, it's not just that the US uses the currency. It's like the second, like all the European countries will use the dollar, if not the euro, for transactions. Is that most of the trade that these countries themselves do
is in US
dollars. China does their trade in US dollars. Brazil does its trade in US dollars. So yeah, I mean, clearly there is an idea. There is
some sort of desire for this, but
exactly
the output, I think, is not likely to yield this end result anytime
in the near future. And especially with, I mean, the Chinese economy, yes, it's by some metrics the largest in the world. Actually, I think we can make this point now. It is true that between the countries that form BRICS, always with an asterisk here, because South Africa, again, is a really small economy in comparison with the global economies. But in comparison, G7 and BRICS, for example, comparison G7 and BRICS, it's clearly gone, and it's going to keep on going in favor of BRICS, even if it's just because of its population. By 2010, 34.3% of the global GDP belonged to G7 countries, whereas only 26.6% belonged to BRICS states. Now in 2023, that statistic has shifted, and it's 29.9% belongs to G7 countries, and 32.1% belongs to BRICS. Now, yes, G7 is an established organization in their matter, but G7 also has behind a lot of countries that are not measured in this metric. For example, I always say the same. G7 is not, like Spain is not in G7, but Spain has a larger economy than South Africa, and depending on the year and how you're measuring the value of oil, they have a comparable economy to Russia or Australia too. So clearly, the Chinese economy is taking the lead in this sense.
Exactly,
the Chinese economy takes the lead, but then India also falls short from the first 4 positions
and then, I think,
of BRICS, of G7.
As well, when you talk about the BRICS economy growing, we have to remember that these economies aren't growing, like Chinese economy is not growing because of BRICS. It's growing separate to that grouping. But I think now it would be good to go through a bit about why these groups are trying to make it more prominent on the world stage, why they're looking at expanding. Obviously, they had their first expansion since South Africa joined in 2010, just last year, with the acceptance of new members, and what they're kind of trying to do with the organization. I think to start with that, I would say, if we look at, for South Africa, for instance, I always say, what benefit does South Africa get? They get to have their voice on this forum, which is with some very powerful countries in the world. And I think all the BRICS members benefit from saying that BRICS is more important than it actually is, because that elevates the potential political output that you get from any statement from BRICS. Mm-hmm. If you're saying, yep, everybody wants to join BRICS, BRICS is a super important organization, it becomes almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy that then the word carries more weight. And so they all have this vested interest in underscoring the political importance of BRICS, even if it's not that important on the real global stage. So I think that's a key thing for me about why they are having these regular forums, and it's a good photo opportunity for, Vladimir Putin just had the recent one in Kazan in Russia, and he can be there shaking hands with Narendra Modi, the the Prime Minister of India, and Xi Jinping is there, and then he can use it as a forum for saying, yep, we're not isolated in the world, we've got political backing from different partners, despite the fact that if we look at the BRICS countries, they are kind of all over the spectrum ideologically where they sit in the world, right?
Yeah, I think we can start in that sense, because this rebirth of BRICS, or like re-emergence of the intention of hosting the meetings, having some more importance, is directly a result of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. After Russia invades Ukraine, there is they're cut out from many parts of the international system, they're put on sanctions, so on. And there is this, what we've talked about many times, there is this push in geopolitics in the geopolitical aspect of international relations, for that competition where Russia doesn't want to be left out. Therefore, Russia uses this sort of these summits to, as you just said, to portray itself as having allies, as being part of the world, and as being not just part, but also like in the leading position. In the end, you host a meeting in Kazan, you have all the leaders there, and so on. And it's also really valid, for example, for China. China has been China always looks to counterbalance the United States whenever they can, because it's good for their geopolitical stance in the world. India has had a really two-sided position regarding Russia and conflict between Russia and the West, where yes, India is still part and big economic part of trade with the United States, with the European Union, and so on. But India has been providing also with sanctioned materials from the West to Russia. There's been
but I mean, I think
there's some suspicion that India has been selling oil from Russia to the West. So,
but like, I mean, for India, say, I think that's an important point. If we look, each of the BRICS countries have their own ideological setting and their own goals. And so for Russia, they want to present this unified force against the West, and they want to say, we want to go to a multipolar world. They can't be then hit with sanctions the way they have been in the war. For China doesn't want conflict with the West at all, the same way that Russia does. They want to be trading with the West. That's, if you look, the US is China's largest trading partner. They don't want to sever the relationship in the same way that Russia does. And for India, they have a historical disagreements with China, significant, and they still don't get along very well as partners. And India likes to portray this non-aligned movement where they've basically been refusing to take sides during the Cold War, and they still continue that sort of today with, they're still members of the Quad, for instance, with Australia, US, and Japan. They have very close ties with the US, and there's a lot of investment going into India from the US. But on the other hand, India is very happy to take that cheap Russian oil that now needs a home, as Europe is not taking that. So they're just basically using it for their own benefits, but they're not really tied to the same agenda as Russia, as China. And again, South Africa went through their outlook for BRICS, and then For Brazil, again, it's completely different. They've obviously close ideological ties to the US as well. I think
exactly. That's what I wanted to say. Brazil is the largest economy of America outside of the United States, and they've, especially with the government of Lula da Silva, they've always tried to play a balancing role in the world where they will have their spot in the top tier, basically, and they will be leaders within South America. And they will be present basically everywhere in every international forum, having a strong presence, but a strong presence that doesn't search for conflict. It searches for balance and, of course, profiting from for the country. But with that balance, actually, the same within months, Lula da Silva was visiting the White House and then going to the Kazan summit. So
yeah, so he's obviously, same as South Africa. I think South Africa also plays this balancing act between the West being really large trading partners, China being the other large trading partner of South Africa. So they kind of all have their own vested interest, whereas Russia is trying to portray this unity behind the grouping, that they're all against the West. It's just not factually supported by the trade, by the political stance of the different leaders. I think that's important to highlight. And then now if we go on to the expansion of BRICS.
Yeah, because what happened this year and why it became more notorious is because by 2023 already there were some invitations to in the summit in South Africa. There were some invitations. Egypt was invited, Ethiopia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates.
And Argentina as well.
And Argentina. Argentina rejected the expansion. Argentina, was in line for it, but then with the change of government, they rejected their introduction onto BRICS.
And for Saudi, they haven't ratified it yet either. So they're still just an observer. They send a delegation to the summits, but they're not a full member. Again, because Riyadh themselves have extremely close military and economic ties to the US, to Washington. So it's not really in their interest to join this group trying to call out the West at all either as well, because they are very much closely tied to the West for their economy, for their security.
Apart from these countries which were offered the membership, and Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates is so far
part of BRICS Plus.
They are part of BRICS Plus. I don't know if they will have to think about a different naming in the future. There's other 13 new partner countries which are not members of BRICS, but they are partners, and their addition to the organization, although it's not really an organization, it's more like a
informal grouping. But
yes, it's an informal grouping. At least for now, there is not any like statutes official. Like you can say, okay, this is some organization. But then the other partner countries, the 13 partner countries, are Algeria, Belarus, Bolivia, Cuba, Indonesia, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Nigeria, Thailand, Turkey, Uganda, Uzbekistan, and Vietnam. Then you have, you definitely have different reasons for them to enter in. If you are looking for economic competitivity, Belarus, it's not the first option, for example. But yeah, clearly these countries also have a lot of trade, especially with China, basically like everywhere else in the world, though. And within their regions, they can play the roles of, many of them, they can play the roles of regional powers. So being in this group basically gives them a stand also, as you were mentioning, for South Africa, in a global stage where they can have their saying and
exactly, I think
they can participate of it.
As I said, like the BRICS summits have got a lot of attention in South Africa last year and Kazan in Russia this year. And for a lot of these countries, their leaders are not really seen on the global stage. Their voices are not definitely particularly prominent to be able to influence international relations. And I think that's part of the reason why we see, trying to emphasize the importance of BRICS and then get more people behind it, because then they can say, it has more of a voice. But I think also what you have to remember then is it kind of dilutes the messages that you can send, because the more people you add, the more difficult it is to get any sort of consensus about what's the direction of the organization itself or the grouping, So then I think long term that kind of will undermine the ability for BRICS to act in sort of a unified manner. I mean, as we said, they don't really do that particularly much at the moment, but the more people you add, the more difficult that becomes, I believe.
I mean, I think with what we are not making an episode about it, but I think you have 3 countries that are basically, that have been in a proxy conflict until yesterday. You have Russia, Iran, and Turkey in the same group of countries, when they were like clearly having their proxies, or Russia directly involved with their Air Force.
And Saudi, as we said, like obviously Saudi was also invited to join and still part of the group, although not a full member. They they have had their regional basically proxy conflict with Iran over the past 2 decades for control over the Middle East ideology.
Fair to say, though, this conflict, and we've talked about it in the podcast, this conflict was like, there were some approaches made by China diplomatically for Iran and Saudi to have
some sort of normalization.
Yeah, some sort of normalization, which makes sense, especially given the state of the Iranian economy. And these conflicts of Lebanon and Syria have shown that Iran, yes, it's your partner, but they don't really have the economic capacity or the muscle to actually enforce their geopolitical vision furthermore than having that support in a proxy group or stuff like this. It's a little bit following this image of the almighty ayatollahs that could go anywhere in the Middle East and blah, blah, blah. I mean, arguably, in the last 2 years, they've been kicked.
I mean, Iran is now severely diminished force in the Middle East following Israel and Hamas's war. But
so with all of this, I think we can go. We've already talked what we think about it, but I think we can go a little bit deeper in what we think about it. Because, for example, I do think that there is, for better or worse, there is a possibility of BRICS to be some parallel forum of discussion, of economic discussions, where given the chance and the right motivation and the right impetus, specifically from China, in my opinion, but also if Saudi Arabia, the UAE, my opinion, China, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Brazil, for example, these 4 states would have enough importance in specific world trade parts, like Brazil in raw materials and in meat. China will have, China is China, and then in fossil fuels, as Saudi Arabia and the UAE are. If they actually want to develop and detach from the US-led economic system, it is a possibility that with time it can get developed within BRICS. Although I do agree that the differences, specifically political and geopolitical differences that these states have, are really complex. Like, for example, now China and India, they were signing some agreements of friendship over the
disputed territory.
Over the disputed territories.
Northeast India.
But, I mean, we've seen this movie before. And yes, these alignments they tend to be a little bit loose, because right now it's a moment where they actually don't need to use the other for their own internal public, but as soon as they need to use the other for their own internal public and call for these external threats that it's been, the state would rally the people and would again send 500,000 troops to Southwest China or North India, as you see it. Russia is a decaying economy that is more in need than helpful, or at least is what it seemed. They militarily, that's what the almighty Russia was expected to be. They haven't managed to break through in Ukraine. Now they lost Syria. There are in complications in the Sahelian states and in Central Africa. So all of actually the one that I see really well in this sense is Brazil. Like, Brazil has a growing economy. Depends on how they manage to handle the upcoming geopolitical turmoil that there's going to be. but still is a country that is outside of the main areas of conflict, and they can play on every side and still have
exactly. I think
with everyone. But yeah, I mean, I do see a potential, but I don't see a reality, at least of now. I don't know what you say there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably come across that I'm quite skeptical of the usefulness of BRICS, or the potential. But I definitely agree that it has. They can slowly chip away at the dominance of the US dollar, but is that going to bring the US dollar or the economy crashing down? Nowhere near on the timescale that would be required to do that. So I think a lot of their power is kind of overstated. Their inability to act as a unifying group even, and the massive ideological differences between the members, I think are going to keep them separate and keep them not being able to act as a unified force. And I think a lot of the talk that goes on about how much inter-BRICS trade there is and all this, how important that is for the group. The one thing I always say is, like, would this trade be happening without any such thing as BRICS? And in 99% of the cases, the answer is yes. So BRICS is not facilitating that trade. That trade's happening anyway. And then people are saying, look, it's all BRICS trade, which has really got nothing to do with actual BRICS unity or anything like this. It'll be the existing situation and then trying to claim that as a win for the group.
Yes, actually, that, for example, the agreements now between China and Brazil in trading in their national currencies. I mean, this is something that would have happened regardless of BRICS. This is something that it's good for both countries.
Exactly, and for China,
it's a bilateral agreement. It's not even in the BRICS setup that is like everyone is going to do it this way.
Exactly. I mean, for China, they obviously have invested significantly all around the world in the Belt and Road Initiative and things like this. So this is happening not just with BRICS countries, but with many countries across the world, whether that's in Africa, South America, Asia, even the Pacific. You know, that's their basically their idea and prerogative to do that, irrespective of BRICS. And then so yeah, all this investment in Brazil. They just opened a massive port in Chile as well. So,
and I think it's also a matter of political thing. You know, it's like you have this summit where you can, for example, most of the countries would have a revisionist perspective of the like an actual revisionist perspective of the Security Council. Not necessarily Russia, because Russia has benefited from the current setup of the Security Council, and they can say 20 million times that they want more people with a veto. Russia is going to veto it at the end because they have the veto. And at this point, even in their current position, they can veto any resolution from the Security Council whenever they want. It's like the US. They're going to criticize the system, but the system was made
to benefit
them.
To benefit China, Russia, US, France, UK, the five Security Council permanent members, which, I mean, most people would agree that there should be a reform to the Security Council, but BRICS isn't going to be the thing to facilitate that.
And for example, for that, countries like Brazil would find more help in countries like Germany.
With a more legitimate stake.
A more legitimate state, although, well, Germany is a little...
Or an African voice as well. Like
Nigeria.
Exactly.
Yes, and South Africa. Ethiopia also in that manner. But definitely, it sounds weird that Russia or China would relinquish their power within, like
as one of the 5 veto powers of the UN Security Council.
Exactly. Like maybe expanding this. I don't disagree that maybe they would accept as some African state and so on. Yes, but
again, the more countries that have veto power, the less the less functional will be. The more difficult it is to pass any resolutions, and I guess the more useless the organization it becomes in some ways, because if you can't pass anything, then what's the point of it?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that we can discuss one day also in comparison with the African Union, for example, and how the decisions have to be taken unanimously or in the EU, how they have to, and sometimes the decision take longer. However, in the Security Council, it hasn't stopped the invasion of Ukraine, it hasn't stopped the invasion of Gaza.
Hasn't stopped the war in
Sudan. So, I mean, clearly there are ways to...
Deficiencies in there.
There are deficiencies there. And it's absolutely legitimate that many of these states have have grievances with the current system. However, as we've been saying, for now, it is a little bit overplayed. I remembered in 2014, 2013, when I started studying, and we still had access to Russia, to RT, to Russia Today, that they were portraying BRICS as like, well, just like now, like BRICS is gonna destroy the US dollar, blah, blah, blah. It's so good, it's so great. This was 2013, 2014. Then in the following 10 years, not much happened until Russia needed to revitalize it, and China saw it as... I mean, China and India, I think they both...
They also benefit from elevating the forum, but I think... Just to say a bit of a pun at the end, I think it's a bit of a brick wall that they're going to run into.
Okay.
With the usefulness of the organization.
Okay, then I think with that phrase, I think we can leave it there. We're not going to have a better idea than hitting a brick wall. So just a reminder, this episode goes together with the next newsletter issue that will be issued on 11 December. And we will have another episode of the Geopolitical Pickle before the end of the year. A little bit of some Christmas special thingy that we have ready for you. So just remember to check us on social media, check our episodes, check the Disinformation Project. We're really happy with the result, and we think you will enjoy. And well, that's all from me.
That's all from me too. And thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you next time on the Geopolitical Pickle.
That's all.
The Geopolitical Pickle is created by Ronan Wordsworth and Juan Francisco Muñoz. Follow us on Instagram at The Geopolitical Pickle or Twitter at The GeoPickle for more content, and follow us on every podcast platform.